Greetings, fellow researchers. This is a short little video about how to analyze and interpret qualitative data. The analyzing and interpreting part of the research process is towards the end, and what you see in front of you is the overview of all the different steps in the research process. And as you can see, the analyzing and interpreting part and also the reporting part is the last step in this process. This guide here gives you an overview of what the interpreting and analyzing process looks like for qualitative data. You'll see at the bottom the data collection part of the process. That's where you go ahead and complete your interviews, or you do your observations, create your field notes, and whatever materials that you're going to use for the qualitative process. That's where the process begins, at the bottom of this particular chart. The next step is to do something to organize that data. One way to do it would be to actually create transcriptions of the interviews. For our processes, we're not going to won't be doing that. If we were doing a little more serious academic work, we definitely would want to have the interviews transcribed so we'd be able to see in front of us the full expression of the people that we interviewed. The next step would be to read through the transcriptions or read through the data and take a look at it. Just familiarize yourself with its contents. The next step is to actually code that information to to identify the different segments of the information that you've collected. Then we would go ahead and create text that would, or create themes, and that would organize that information into broad kind of categories that would interpret what you've seen in the interviews that you've conducted. Now you notice the way this chart works. It's what we call an iterative chart. That means something that you would go through over and over and over again. And you can see the arrows pointing to the top of the page, go back down, and you would what that means is that you would, once you've completed the process once, you would go through and do it again, and you would look at it through a different set of eyes. This time as a set of eyes that actually has gone through the information once, going ahead and created the codes and started to develop the themes, and you would go through it again. And it's interesting to see what you see on the second and third time through a process like this. What we're doing is we're creating what's called, we're going through a grounded theory approach. And the grounded theory way of doing qualitative analysis is to actually create theories about what you've seen based on the observations and the interviews that you've conducted. And so it gets its name from taking themes and grounding them, or using the actual events that you've seen or the interviews you've conducted to support the themes that you are generating. Chapter 13 in our text gives us more information about how that process works. So how do you do grounded theory, or how do you tackle this kind of an evaluation process? Well, the first step is to actually conduct the interviews or to do the observations. But the actual practical part of this comes when you start coding the data. And so what you'll do in this step is to take a look at what you've collected, and transcriptions if you have it, or field notes if that's all you've done. And you would go ahead then and code that, or give names to the various sections of what you've seen. Maybe this slide will help you get a better idea of what we're actually doing here. Notice that there are two parallel lines, parallel categories. At the top, the initial reading through the text, dividing the text into segments, labeling it with codes, reducing those codes and looking for duplication of codes, or what's called redundancy, and then collapsing the codes into themes. In practicality, what this means is that you would, once you are looking at the information that you gathered from the interviews and the observations, and you were to code that, you could literally have dozens, if not hundreds, of codes that we have identified little snippets of information. What you're going to be doing with that is constantly organizing and collapsing and combining those codes into themes, so that you would have maybe only 3 or 4 themes that would explain what it is that you saw. So for example, let's say that you were looking for how to effectively teach middle school children in a economically challenged environment, and you were to observe maybe 15 or 20 highly effective teachers, and you would go ahead and identify all the different things that they did. They They acknowledged all the students. They affirmed the quality of their work. They set high standards. Anyway, you would keep on going over a list and list and list, or various lists that you would use to identify the different things that those teachers would do. And after a while, you would run into literally dozens, if not hundreds, of those codes, or you would have created dozens, if not hundreds, of those codes. What you would do then is you would combine those into maybe 2 or 3 or 4 different themes that would explain in broad strokes what it is that made these particular teachers effective. How do you code? How do you code the snippets of information or the chunks of information? Well, there's 3 different ways that you can do this. One is to have the segment itself suggest to you by way of imagery what that particular segment is all about. So, like something like setting the bar high. That could be a way of talking about a teacher who insists on high standards and quality work. So that gives you an image of a particular part of the interview, a particular part of the observation. What it means to do something in vivo actually means in life or out of life, and it could actually be a word that's in that segment that you use to characterize it. So if a particular teacher used a particular word to describe what they were doing, that word might be the word that best describes that segment, and you would use that. Or there could be a word that comes to you from the literature, and the literature suggests a particular category. That could be a word that you would use to identify a particular segment. In our text, they actually have a transcription, and you can see on the left-hand side the different codes that were used. And then on the right-hand side, the beginnings of the generation of themes that that particular code might suggest. As we mentioned, after the coding process, you could literally have dozens, if not hundreds, of themes. Of codes, and then you're going to go ahead and take those codes and divide those or clump those into themes. Once you're done with that, you're going to report your findings in the next section of the paper. What we're going to do then is we're going to go ahead and take all of that and combine it together and write in a way that's a little bit different, actually, than a quantitative section. Quantitative sections tend to be somewhat antiseptic, somewhat dry, very straightforward. But in a qualitative paper, you actually could be a bit more effusive, a bit more emotive in what you're saying. It writes more like a novel. You can use metaphors and analogies and try to present the information in a way that captures what the person is saying, both in terms of content and in tone. One of the ways that we talk about this is writing in rich, thick description. And rich, thick description is a way of giving the detail of what you're writing, giving it life and giving it color. Other kinds of information that you can use, you can go ahead and create tables or maps. Here's some examples of how that might work. Here's a comparison table that somebody could use to talk about 2 different ways that groups talk about something. In this case, way female statements or male statements about professionalism. You can put them side by side. You can do a demographic table that would show you who it is that you were including in your survey or in your interviews. Note about APA formatting. Here's an example of what APA formatting looks like. You notice that there are no vertical lines, only horizontal lines. APA is famous for this simplified way of doing tables. There are basically only 3 lines. 2 lines separate the heading, and 1 line comes at the bottom of the table. All the information in between the second and third line are not separated by any lines. When you're done, you interpret the findings. You would go ahead then and summarize those in a very broad kind of way. And this is where you can editorialize and include your personal reflections, obviously tied back to the literature. What did the literature say that confirmed what you saw, or what you saw confirmed the literature, or did it disprove the literature, or fill in a detail? Now, we haven't talked much about how to do this kind of work in qualitative research, but when you're done, you have to figure out or demonstrate whether or not these findings are valid, or if it was just a unique, one-of-a-kind case. So what we would do here is you would actually cross-check it after you're done. Now, we're not going to do this for our paper, but if this were a more serious research paper that we were doing, you'd want to check with other situations to see if what you found is consistent. That process is called triangulation, where you take your perspective and what you've observed, and you would include a third element, somebody else's experiences outside of your own. Okay, that about sums up. They should have enough information from this to get started in your work. If you have any questions, obviously feel free to contact me. The best of luck to you all in your work on this project.